food, but they're leaves for schach. Yeah, so fine. So they're leaves, right?
So what's the kiddush?
Abaye amar b'shushay mesachim b'shavtzirei lo mesachim. No, you can use this shushay. You can't use this shavtzirei. Why not? My timer. Kivin desari reichayhu, because once they spoil, they're once it starts withering, then it starts making a stink, the leaves, and shavik lahu v'nafik. Then you'll leave your sukkah and you'll walk out. So for Abaye, and this is actually something that we've seen, something we've seen from Abaye in the past, is that Abaye, focuses us not just on the technical question of, is this a kosher object, is this the right size, but also the reality of, have you created a sukkah that's habitable? There was a case before about if you have low schach, and you have like strands of schach hanging within 10 tefachim. But even though technically that doesn't mean that the size of the sukkah is any smaller, the reality is it makes it no longer habitable. So the point here he's saying is the same thing. These leaves might be kosher schach, but you can't use it for sukkah because it'll spoil and you'll leave. Now, it's interesting, right? Is he saying that rabbinically you're not yotzei? Is he saying lechatchila you shouldn't? Why don't I say I'll use it until it gets bad and then I'll leave or whatever? But it sounds like Abaye is doing more than just giving advice. Abaye is saying that since it's set up in a way that that it's not really habitable in any serious, under normal conditions or over a period of time, it is not considered a dira and you're not yotzei. Similarly, we have the next debate. Again, top line of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, Hani Hizmi v'Higi, various types of thorn bushes. Mesachim, you can use them. Because again, you cut them off of the ground and it grows from the ground. It's not makabel tumah. Why not? Abaye amar b'hizmi mesachim. Hizmi, which is one type of a thorn bush, you can use. Higi, which is a different type of a thorn bush, lo mesachim, you can't use. My timer, why not? Kivin the nasri tarfayu shavik lo v'nafik. Because the second type of bush, naturally the leaves will left cut off of the ground and on top of your schach, maybe exposed to sun. Eventually the leaves will start dropping off of the bush and fall down, and therefore not just that you'll be left with not sufficient schach, but then it'll start becoming uninhabitable because you'll have all these leaves falling onto your head and into your soup and onto your food. So therefore it's not good. Again, is that just l'chachila? Is that even b'di'evet? Is he claiming that rabbinically? Is he claiming that biblically? But Abaye does have a consistent position that he says, I'm not just looking at the technical parameters. If it's not really going to be habitable because of the circumstances, to me that's a problem as well. Okay, now we get back to the point of our Mishnah, which was a bundle of wood you can't use, and trying to more precisely define or deal with cases of what constitutes a bundle. So let's take a look. Rav Gidol Amar Rav, says Rav Gidol in the name of Rav. Hi afkusa de dikla. If you have a I don't know how they translate it, but basically the Rashi says it's like a bundle, but it's a natural bundle, like a collection of shoots of palm branches, but all coming from a sort of a common source. I'm trying to think of what an example would be, but maybe it's not. This is not what the Gemara is talking about, because the Gemara is talking about a palm tree or things that grow at the base of a palm tree. But if you think about, let's say I were to chop off a branch of a tree. Right? Would I say, well, that's like a bundle of wood because it's got one branch and I've got all these sticks of wood coming from it? And the answer is no, because that's a natural bundle. It's not a man-made bundle. So this is the same type of an idea. Like it's a lot of shoots. You know what a good example would be? Again, this wouldn't be directly relevant because this is food, so it wouldn't be kosher anyway. But think about like a bunch of celery, right? Where you got all these stalks, right, which are bunched at the bottom. So it almost looks like a bundle of wood, right? It's like a lot of stalks of things, but they're all naturally joined at the bottom. So he's saying that's not a problem. Again, we're not dealing with food, okay? So that, because then it would be makabel tumah. That's not a problem because that's a bundle, but it's not a human-made bundle, a man-made bundle, okay? So misachindu afagav dagide, although they are bundled up, eged b'dei shamayim lo shmei eged. It's made by heaven, as it were, the knot. You know, they're joined together naturally. They're not humanly bound. Now, did I skip a line? Now you went ahead again. Think about the bunch of celery is the best, I think, visual example. Although again, we're not talking about food. Now you went ahead and had that natural joining at the bottom, and you took a string and you made a string around the stalks, at the top. So you actually made a human bundle. Even though you did, even though
Right,
you
so
had,
you're saying it was still joined. You just
yeah,
applied
you'd
more.
started joined naturally, and now you're going to put a string around it and join it
Except in
together.
the case if you tore them apart and put them back together.
Right. If you tore it apart, it'd be different. But no, it was already naturally joined. Agid lahu. Agid b'chad lo shmei eged. Joining something that's already one is not an eged. We've already decided that since it's natural, it's considered to basically be one unit. It's not considered to be multiple units joined together. So therefore, if you now made a string around your celery stalks, you haven't bundled up celery stalks because it was already one unit. So even if you added a string to it, you would not have made it into a bundle. You would not have made it a problem. Amar Rav Chiza Amar Ravina Bar Shila. Hani Dukre Dekani. This is basically the same thing, except instead of talking about some type of a stalks or whatever that grow from a palm, this is talking about the same type of things with reeds. That you have like a collection of a shoot of reeds all coming out that are joined at the bottom. Misachim behu, you can use that as schach. Afagav da agidininu, although they're naturally joined together. Eged b'dei shemayim lo shmei eged. It's all done naturally, and therefore it's not considered like a bundle.
What is this adding?
Nothing, just applying it to case of reeds. If you knew the difference between if you had an experience with the palm branches and with the reeds, you might appreciate what the chiddush is. But I have no idea. It's the same idea except this is with reeds. Avagav the hadar agilu. Even though you then went ahead and you made a bundle around like a knot around these reeds. Joining something, bundling something that's already one unit is not making an eged, and therefore even if you made a bundle on it, as long as they remain naturally connected at the bottom, it is not a problem. We taught similarly, kanim v'dukranim, reeds or sticks literally, and dukranim, which is dukranim is also like some type of a poles. Misachim behem. You can make it with schach. So the Gemara says kanim pshita. So kanim is like obvious. So right, why couldn't you make it? It didn't say it's a bundle. It just said reeds. Of course you can make schach with reeds. Ema kanim shel dukranim misachim behem. No. So what it means is reeds that are of dukranim, and here again, whatever this means is the reeds that are of this type of a bunch. So it's not referring to two things, it's referring to one thing. A bunch of reeds, a naturally growing bunch of reeds, you can use it for schach. And that's the idea we said, that although they're bunched together, since it's natural, it is not considered to be a bundle, and it's okay. Okay. If you have bitter herbs of the swamp, you can use it to fulfill your obligation on Pesach. It counts as maror. And the chiddush is going to be, although it has a what's called a shem levi, a qualifying name, a descriptive name. It's not just called generically maror. It's called swamp maror. Nevertheless, that's in the category of maror. The additional characterizing name, qualifying name, descriptive name, does not make it a different subspecies. Does not make it a different type of a plant. Well, the only reason now we're saying it is because it's Amar Rav Chiza, Amar Ravina. That has nothing to do with schach. If you look before, the statement about Dukre Tekani was Amar Rav Chiza, Amar Ravina. So this is really completely unrelated. It's just the same person who says it. Okay? So the same source of tradition of Chiza Amar Ravina is Allah about Hilchos Pesach. You can use horseradish. That's swamp horseradish. Now, I think, by the way, the etymology, I forgot to check this, the etymology of the word horseradish has something to do with swamp. Like horse is not a horse. It's from, let me see if I can find it right now. Somehow it's through some poor some type of a translation that ultimately is rooted in something of, I think, like a radish of the sea or a radish of the swamp. Hold on a second. Use Rabbi Google here. Let's see what Wikipedia is. What?
An excellent.
Excellent rabbi. Rabbi Google, he always knows everything. You don't think he's never available on Shabbos. Okay. Let's take a look. Let's see if it says anything about the etymology. Wikipedia does not. Let me just do one more experiment here. Horse radish etymology. Okay. Oh, no, it says it is actually. Horse meaning strong. Strong radish. Okay, I thought it was something else. That the word came somehow from something relating to sea radish or swamp radish. I don't know, horse is a strong animal. Anyway, fine. Okay, so anyway, all right. So he says that this horseradish of the bitter herbs of the swamp you can use. Now, what's the chiddush? So it says like this. I'll ask you on this. The chiddush is that it has this qualifying name of the swamps. Azov, when the Torah says you have to use a bunch of hyssop for the Korban Pesach, and then we also link it to using a bunch of hyssop for like the sprinkling of the ashes of the paraduma, it says agudat Azov, a bunch of hyssop. So Azov, actually later we're going to deal with the idea that it says a bunch, right? And what constitutes a bunch when we say a bunch of hyssop? The same way here we say an agudah, a bunch of sticks. But here the focus is just going to be on what plant constitutes hyssop. Azov, below Azov Yava, not Greek hyssop. Below Azov Kuchli, and not bluish Azov. Below Azov Midbari, or wilderness Azov. Below Azov Romi, or Roman Azov. Below Azov Shesh Lo Shem Levi, not any type of a hyssop that has a qualifying, an attendant name, some type of a descriptive name. That makes it a subspecies and not standard Azov. So if that's true, why not say the same about horseradish? It has to be called maror and not maror of the swamp. So Amar Abaye, Kol Shenishtana Shmo Kol Matan Torah. No, here's the difference. If did it have a different name, meaning did it have a qualifying name? It wasn't generic. It was some type of a X type of horseradish, X Azov, Greek Azov, Roman Azov. Did it have that qualifier name, that attendant name? If it had that before the Torah was given, and then the Torah came along and did not say any word that it suggested something more inclusive. It just used the standard generic term, hyssop. And so if there were other types of hyssop, Greek hyssop, Roman hyssop, this and that, and the Torah just said hyssop, so we're saying only standard hyssop, not any of these subspecies. So Biyadua,
meaning it was mentioned twice in the Torah.
Yeah, no. Nishtana is a slightly misleading term. It just means it has a different name. It's not just included in the broad generic name hyssop. Before the Torah was given, there already was a species known as Roman hyssop and as Greek hyssop and as blue hyssop. There were other types of hyssop out there, and the Torah came and said hyssop, without indicating hyssops in the plural, without in any way suggesting the idea that it was an inclusive word. So that means just the standard, not these variations.
So that's a bit of a, I guess, for them, since they didn't really have the science. How do you know?
How do you know what they had at the time of Matan Torah? Yeah, that is a good question. Okay, the Torah came and was makpid, meaning of only somehow by silence. It was makpid to say only the standard variation. So therefore, it is known. It's a funny phrase. It's known that it has an attendant name, meaning that the presence of the attendant name makes it a different species and not acceptable. It's a funny way of saying it, but that seems to be the point. The honey, the other types of horseradish, they weren't known as a subspecies at the time of the Torah was given. So the Morah of the Torah includes them. They only got some subcategorization later, so they were never excluded by the word Morah of the Torah. So one answer is a fascinating, historical answer, which is like exactly this question. How did they know when these names differed and so on? Okay. Rava has another answer. Hani Mirisa Stamashmayu. No. These things that you called swamp maror are really just called maror. The high dekarilu marisa the agma, the fact that they're called swamp maror, they're found in the swamp, meaning it's not a proper name, it's a descriptive name, right? If I said to you, go get me some, what would be the example? I don't know, red peppers and orange peppers and green peppers, right? I don't know, maybe those are different species. But I'm just, using it to describe what color I want. I'm not using it as a different type of a species, right, of peppers. What? Is the green one on right pepper? Really? Okay, even better example. It says if swamp maror means, the type that grows in the swamp, but we're not saying that in some official scientific way it's a subspecies, which is also fascinating because, they didn't have like a science of taxonomy of, I don't think they did, of vegetables at the time. So what would put something in a separate subspecies? Meaning, presumably it would just be how people would use it, like the way in which people would refer to it. So he still may be saying that even from the way people refer to it, they don't identify it, they don't call it like, this is a swamp mara with capital S and capital M. They call it lowercase s. People still, even if we're not going by science, even if we're going by human categorization, they're still using that identifier as an adjective and not as a proper name, and therefore it's not really a different species. Anyway, I would have said two things. I would say first is that I would have said, and this is a point the Gemara makes in Psachim. There's a better answer. It would seem that there's a better answer, which is the Torah says mirorim, bitter herbs, which is what allows the Gemara to say that you can have multiple different types of things that constitute maror. Even very different things, right? You can have horseradish, possibly. There's a debate whether our horseradish really is maror, and you could have like romaine lettuce. It's not talking about one narrowly defined species. It's bitter herbs in the plural, so it's a very inclusive category. So if that's true, my God, if you could go from romaine lettuce to horseradish, so different types of horseradish presumably would be included as well. The Torah's word is more of a descriptive word than a sort of a species term, than a proper term. So it's funny that the Gemara doesn't suggest that to allow it to be more descriptive either. Anyway, this idea of the Gemara about Shein Levi and is it the thing itself or not, it comes up a number of times in the Gemara. I remember it was just like a month ago. It was such a funny sequence I saw on Jon Stewart on The Daily Show where he did something which was like a perfect illustration of this. He was like ranking on Chicago, and Chicago has what is it, deep pan pizza? So it was going on and on about how they talk about how their, pizza is whatever, so amazing. And it was, anyways, ranking on it that it does it, about how it's not, doesn't really taste as good as New York pizza. Anyway, the last part he did was, and what is, and you know what Chicago, he says, what you call this? You call this deep pan pizza, Chicago pizza. He says, you know what this is? And he picks up a slice of pizza. So Shein Levi, it's not the real thing. All right, anyway. So Rabbi says, Amar Rabbi. So anyway, two explanations about why this swamp mower is not a problem. So he says, Amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda, we just said that if you bind one thing up and it's already one unit, like it's these different stalks that are combined at the bottom, it's not considered a bundle. You don't make a bundle with one unit, even if it's somehow different stalks combined in a unit. Eged shalosh shmei eged. However, if you have, what is the minimum size of a bundle? So I mentioned to you yesterday that Tosfos quotes Yerushalmi that says 25, right? He is doing a much more minimalist approach. He is saying, or a machmir approach, that even three sticks bound together is an eged and you can't use it. Shnayim, now what if you have two stalks bound together? That's machlokas Rabbi Yossi Rabbanan, the debate of Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan, not by Sukkah, but by another halacha that there's an idea of eged, of a bundle, okay, which is what, and presumably he's saying that the same debate there would apply to Sukkah. What do we find there? Now we taught in the Mishnah. Mitzvahs Ezov. So now we're talking with not just the quality of the thing that's the Ezov, what counts as a Hissap, but the idea that the Torah says Agudat Ezov, a bundle of Ezov. Now it says the bundle by the blood of the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim. But we also learn to apply this idea of a bundle of Ezov to like the sprinkling of the ashes of the Paraduma, that has to be a bundle. So how many makes a bundle? So mitzvahs Ezov, the mitzvah of the Ezov is Shlosha Klachim, 3 stalks. Behen Shlosha Givalim, and then they have 3 heads, whatever you call a head of ears. Okay. Now Tosfos says, Rashi and Tosfos both say it doesn't mean 3 ears per stalk; it means 1 ear per stalk. Okay, but they have to have their ears there as well. Rabbi Yossi Omer, mitzvahs Ezov Shlosha Givalim. No, the mitzvah of Ezov does start with the idea of 3 stalks. V'shirav Shnayim. But if after you had the bundle and you bundled them all together and made a knot around them, one of them broke off and you're left with 2 is okay as to retain that identity. It has to start with 3, but it could be left with 2. The Gardumav, and let's say you have some remnant, it's that like you have a little piece of stalk left. Most of it broke off, but you have a little remnant left. Koshu, even the smallest amount. This idea, by the way, is a common one in halacha, that once something gets an identity, it has a higher criteria to be labeled as something, but once it's labeled as it retains that identity, even when a lot less is left over. So, for example, a common example I use is for something to be considered food, to be susceptible to become tamei, it has to be fit for human consumption. But once it is labeled as food, and maybe also particularly once it becomes tamei, then it does not stop being considered food until it becomes not just unfit for human consumption, but even unfit for animal consumption. Right? Once it gets the label, it's much more resistant to losing the label. You might have like a very high threshold before hiring somebody for a job. But once they get the job, they're going to have to really mess up before they get fired. Okay, like there's this idea of I call it the stickiness factor. Okay, or the the inertia factor? Not exactly the same, but anyway. So that's the idea here. You have the idea also maybe relevant, similar to the idea of the hyssop, of a stringy type of a thing. The Gemara in Menachos does this discussion about tzitzis, like what you need for a string of tzitzis, how long it has to be kosher when you make the tzitzis. But if after you made the tzitzis it snaps and you're only left with a tiny little bit, so b'diavad what you're left with is okay. So that's what Rabbi Yossi says. You have to start with 3, but b'diavad, after you start with 3, you can be left with 2. And even if those 2, presumably, even if they break, as long as a little bit is left, you're also okay. All right, so now this is, let's see what the Gemara does with this. It says like this. Kasaka daitach, we're assuming midishira.
The Garduma is referring to the Shtayim or the Shabbat?
Presumably the Shtayim. Kasaka daitach midishira Shnayim. So I just gave you what the Gemara is going to say at the end by Rabbi Yossi. It's probably the pshat of Rabbi Yossi. But the Gemara starts with a different assumption. We're assuming that since in the end Rabbi Yossi says 2, you could be, if you're left with 2, you're okay. He really would say you could start with 2. The Haidiktani Shlosha. So why does he say you start with 3? So lemitzvah, it means that's lechatchila. But since he's okay when you're left with 2, presumably even if you started with 2, it'd be okay. 3 is just a nice lechatchila. Rabbi Yossi Shlosha lemitzvah, l'Rabbanan Shlosha la'ake. So for Rabbi Yossi, 3 is like a mitzvah, is a lechatchila. But for the rabbis, so what's his debate with the rabbis? Presumably when the rabbis say 3, they mean you need 3 even b'diavad. So we try to frame this debate of the rabbis who say 3, and Rabbi Yossi says start with 3 and end with 2, as a debate whether you need 3 or 2. And therefore, that seems to be a debate. When the Torah says a bunch of Azov, agudat Azov, what's the minimum size for a bunch? The rabbis would say 3, and Rabbi Yossi would say 2, and that would be the debate. So the Gemara says, but you can't say that. Vatanya, we taught in the Brisa, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Azov, Tchilaso Shnayim, V'shiar V'echad Pasal. But in Azov, if you began with 2 and were left with 1, maybe means even if you were left with 1 or were left with 1, it's invalid. You cannot begin with 2 for your bunch of Azov. The Eino Kasher, it's only Kasher, Ashe Tchilaso Shlosha. You must begin with 3. Then V'shiar Shnayim. Then if you're left with 2, that's fine. But you must begin with 3. So it's clear for Rabbi Yossi, you have to begin with 3. It's not just a nice mitzvah and lichatchila. So Rabbi says, fine, 8 buch. So reverse what we were saying. Rabbi Yossi shlosh alak. If Rabbi Yossi, you see, if you start with less than 3, it's not good. You need 3 and less than 3, if you don't have 3, it prevents you from being yotzei. Rabbanan shlosh al mitzvah. So when the rabbis say 3, they're being actually more lenient. They're saying it's a mitzvah to do 3. Whereas Rabbi Yossi is saying, no, you absolutely need to start with 3. You don't need to end with 3, but you need to start it. Okay, and how is this relevant to us? So we've now interpreted the debate of Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis by the bunch of hyssop for like the Korban Pesach and for the, for the Paraduma, that Rabbi Yossi says you must start with 3, and the rabbis say 3 is lichatchila, but b'diavad it's okay to start with 2. So that's a debate. What is the minimum number of things that constitutes a bunch? For Rabbi Yossi it's 3, for the rabbis it's 2. Just show you a fascinating little Tosfos, because you'll like Tosfos where he's bringing his proof. B'shlosha shmei eged, Tosfos says, Tema, to Meseches Avos mashma, the pachos michamisha lo shmei eged. No, you were going to ask that? Well, let's just read it. Let's read it. Asarchi yoshvim va'oskim b'Torah shchina b'neihem. 10 people who are living Torah, the Shechina is among them. Shenemer Elohim nitzah b'adas el. That's an Eidah. U'minayin afilu chamisha. How do you know even 5 people? Shenemer va'agudato al eretz yisada. The bunch is established on the land. So you see, a bunch is 5 people. Okay, so not 3. U'minayin shafilu shlosha. Shenemer b'kerev Elohim yishpot. Okay, so that's what. So we said, yeah, the Mishnah B'Yagava says 10 people learning Torah, God is among them, because it says God is among the congregation, and a congregation is 10. How do you know even 5 people? Because it says God's bunch is established on the earth. So Aguda is 5, And how do you know even? I don't know. Knows, but it assumes that
Something you
aguda
hold
is
in your hand.
5.
What's Agudat?
Aguda is a bunch.
Oh, okay.
And how do you know that's what we're talking about? Agudat ezov, an eged, right? So for the bunch of hyssop or for the schach. And how do you know even 3? Because it says, what's supposed to be by 3? Elokim B'kerev Elokim Yishbon, in the midst. So midst means how many people need to have a midst of them, a middle. You need an odd number. You need 3. So it looks like Aguda is 5, not Aguda is 3. So he says the Isvarim Degarsi Ibcha. The Chamisha Nafkalan Mi B'kerev Mishum, and so he says some reverse the Girsa that Kerev Elokim Yishbot is 5 and Aguda is 3 to make it reconciles it with this Gemara. But Tosfos says it doesn't really make so much sense. So in the end, Tosfos says maybe if you want to look at how he answers it. 3 lines from the end of that Tosfos, he says. Maybe a normal aguda is 3, like we say here, and that's what you need for agudat ezov, 3 stalks of hyssop. The verse of God's group is established on the land, means 5. Why? Mishum tichsiv, because the verse next to it says, Af yadi yasta aretz. My hand has shaped the land. Ubiyad yesh ba chamisha etzbos, and the hand has 5. So the group means the bunch of fingers. All right. Anyway, it's cute that he's trying to make learn out from a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, right, which also focuses on the word aguda and what is the minimum of
But the Gemara
aguda.
itself never does that, right? Like quotes from Avos to prove something else.
It does quote from Avos, yeah.
Prove something like.
I think, yeah. I don't remember offhand, but I know that there are definitely. Okay. Anyways, the Gemara says like this. Okay. Vatanya now. So now we've got this debate whether 3 or 2 hyssops, which we're saying also would translate into the issue of schach. Vatanya, don't we teach in a brisa, Ezov tchilaser shnayim v'shirav echad kosher, then Ezov that has to begin with 2, and if it ends with 1, it's kosher. No, Vatanya actually is not a challenge, it's a support. So this is going to show that the rabbis, Rabbi Yossi says you need to start with 3, the rabbis are going to say that you can start with 2 by Ezov, because the Brayta says if you start with 2 and you're left with 1, it's okay. It's only invalid if you start with 1 and end with 1. So you see, it can't be Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says you have to start with 3. So this must be the rabbis, and it says you can start with 2. So we see there is that debate between Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis whether minimally you can start with 3 or 2. What is the minimum size of an aguda? Okay. Now the Gemara just says. Shirav echad pasul, how much is shirav echad kosher? What does it mean that it's invalid if you're left with 1? We said it's valid if you're left with 1 as long as you begin with 2. So unless it's fine, that's what it means. It means elaema. You should read it. It's invalid if you start with what normally we let you end with. If you start with 1, that's invalid. If you started with 2, it's okay to end with 1. But as you need to start with 2. As opposed to Rabbi Yossi that says you need to start with 3 and end with 2. The rabbis say you need to start with 2. If you start with 2, you can end with 1. Yes. But anyway, we have basically said that when it comes to Ezov, an aguda is 3 or 2. So presumably for the Mishnah, although obviously it could have been a very different definition, the Yerushalmi thinks it's a radically different definition. It's 25, because the purpose of our Mishnah is not just it's some abstract, platonic idea of what is a minimum size of a bunch. 3 makes a bunch. It's a practical issue that you're going to, come with your bundle of wood and put it on top of your succah. So they limit it to normal cases of a normal size of a bundle of wood. They normally limit it to 25. Our Gemara makes it much more formalistic definition of bundle and says even 3, presumably, the same way that's an issue for Ezov, that would be the issue for how many minimum stalks or minimum pieces of wood would be invalid to use as for the sukkah. Yes.
They have a machloka of lulav, tzarech, eged, or not. There's the same.
Yeah, that's a good point. Why don't we say that the eged there? Yeah, but although there it's not a. It's a good point. I mean, there you do have 3 things in your eged, so you have more than 3 if you count the multiple pieces of the arav and of the whatever. So it's cute. But there we're not saying the pasuk start with the word eged. The pasuk just uses the vav to combine them. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Darsh Maremar, back to trying to explore the parameters of this idea of a bundle of wood. Hani Isar Yesa Desura, this bundle of stalks from Surah, okay, Misachim Behu, you could use it. Now, why? What's special about it? Afagav de Agdan, even though you made a bundle of them, you knotted them together, L'minyan ba'alma hu da'agdan. You're only doing it for number, meaning you buy something in the store and it's bundled together in order to give you like a count of it. I'm trying to think what a good example would
Buying
be.
a dozen eggs in a box.
I guess like a dozen eggs in a box. Although this is bundled with a string. There's types of things that they would like. A dozen roses. Oh, that maybe is a nice example, right? A dozen roses. So you don't really have the bundle as a way of carrying them, right? It's done in order to know, well, although, right. I don't know, because when you buy a dozen roses, they might count a dozen and then they'll put the bundle. So it's not to
broccoli,
give you.
They put like a string, thing.
Oh, that's a good idea, like a rubber band around the broccoli, because you're buying X number. They're buying them in units. So they're doing it in order to give you a count and to make it easier to sell them as a count, but not that the bundle is meant as a means of actually, for the purpose that they need to be held together or for the means of conveying them or carrying them. So it's not a normal bundle. It's a bundle just for convenience of grouping them together for count, and therefore, even though physically they're held together, that's not an official bundle, and therefore it's not a problem to use it for a sukkah, which is a fascinating idea.
It's fascinating because the whole reason we didn't want these bundles in the first place is to protect you. There's really nothing wrong with it. That was to protect you from
actually putting it on the top of the sukkah, and when it's not made for Succah. But the point is that's the point, that idea that you'll be carrying big bundles of things and put them on top of the sukkah, so we're going to limit it to scenarios where you really bundle things together. This is not really bundled together, right? Okay. So, they're only sort of bundled for their number. Rabbi Abba, Hanit Srifi de Orbani, these types of like huts for trappers. That are Kivan Shuhutra Rashi Ma'adanim Shalahem Ksherim. Once the top is undone, they're kosher. So basically, the way this was made, it was sort of like, so I'll draw a picture here. It was sort of like a teepee. You've got these, like Rashi says, these are rubber leaves, these big willow branches, okay? And you sort of put them together, right? You do it like that, and you make a knot at the top, okay? And you've got at the bottom, right, sort of like, it's conical, right? Not comical. Conical, right? Anyway, you sort of, it looks like this if you like turned it 90 degrees. So you stick under here, it's sort of like, what do you call it? Like, you're with your rifle. It's like, I don't know, it's like you're going in, what do they call those, a blind? Like you're going hunting or whatever. So you hide under there, okay? But this is what it looks like. At the top, it's all these strands that are sort of not, these leaves or whatever that are bundled together. And at the bottom, this part is sort of like woven together with like some type of a weave. It's not like bunched together, but it's sort of like there's like a weave that's sort of keeping
it all together,
keeping the cone together at the bottom and at the top.
Like the mats.
Like the mats. Well, this goes back to the question Michael was asking on Shabbos about the mat. So that's the bottom, but the top is more of a normal bunching of them, right? So let's see what happens. He says. Kivan deshar, where are we? Kivan shahutra rashe ma'adanim shalahem. Once you undo the head of their of the leaves, the head of the stalks, so ksherim, it's kosher. So you can use it now. It's no longer bundled together. I'm not sure. It means the Rashi says it's kasher ma'adanot kima. I don't know, like the stalks or the components of it. I don't know how they translate it there in English.
Well, here they happen to just say knots.
The knots. Okay, the head of the knots.
Word for ksharim.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. So it said, so the Gemara says, V'ha gidei mitatai, and this is like, Michael's question yesterday. How about the bottom? The bottom, it's all sort of woven together. Now, that's not a bundle, right? Because it's sort of keeping this in this canonical thing, and it's like a weave of them together. It's not like a big outer thing, right? This is Michael's question, why isn't the mats a bundle? So let's see what the Gemara says. Isn't it woven at the bottom? So Amar Papa, Jeshari Lahu, you undo it, fine, you undo the weave at the bottom, which then there's a huge question. So what's the chiddush of the whole thing then? So Rafuna Bar Yehuda, Marafilu Teimat Lo, Bar Yusha, Marafilu Teimat Lo Shaylu. No, you don't undo the weave at the bottom. Kol Eged Sheinu Asui the Taltalo Lo Shmei Eged. Okay, similar to the idea before that you're doing it for a number, but he's basically saying that's done as a weave to hold a shape. That's to create a shape. That's not done as a way of bunching together discrete units and holding them so they're more easier to carry. It's not a classic bundle, okay, which is sort of what I said to Michael yesterday. A bundle is you have discrete units and you're putting some outer thing around it, and the Gemara specifically identifies like even that the purpose matters. Are you doing it just for the number, to sell it as a unit, or are you doing it actually to convey it? This is a different physical reality. It's not like an outer thing bundling things together. It's done to give it a particular shape. Now Rashi, by the way, does say, if If you look at Rashi, She'ena Asi L'Kaltalo, I don't know, it's about 20 lines down, beginning of a line, he says, in the narrow lines, he says, Kigon Zeh Shemi Shehitir Kasher El Yon, when you undo the top, Imatam Kaltalo, who Nitak Me'elav, if you were to try to carry it, the whole thing would anyways fall apart. She'elo Elapiv Kalua. You only have this like woven thing. So for Rashi, it sounds like a little different. Like Rashi, if you wanted to read Rashi in a very minimalist way, he would be saying the reason it's not considered a bundle is because it won't stay together. Not just that that's not the purpose of the bottom weave. So if that's true, if you take something like the mat, you'll say, but the mat does stay together. So maybe it is called a bundle because it all does stay together. But nevertheless, we're going to see a later Gemara that's going to be clear that mats that are not makabel tuma, even though they're woven, are not considered to be bundles, are considered okay. So it does seem that the basic idea here is, look, even with the weave, it's not a normal bundle, which is separate discrete units brought together in some outer string holding them together. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. So it seems like we're not getting away from the maror. Like it is fascinating sometimes the way the Gemara keeps on doubling back in things that don't seem so relevant. Like first we talked about Azov, we talked about maror with a attendant name, like swamp maror, and Azov with an attendant name, and that seemed to be like a total digression, right? Because it was the same person who said one thing, mentioned this thing about maror, but we brought in the discussion of maror and Azov, and now we're not giving up on them. We then discussed Azov in terms of defining the minimum bundle, and now we're going to discuss maror and the use of maror for schach in your sukkah. So it's quite fascinating how we're like doubling back on these things, which seem to be a digression. So let's take a look. The vegetables that the rabbi said you could use for your mitzvah of maror on Pesach. So mevi'in es atuma. They transfer tuma, and the ein chotzim bifnei tuma. They're not a chatzitza in the presence of tuma. What does that mean? It means, right, if you have here something that's a roof, right, an ohel, right, it's a tefach by tefach off the ground, and you have a mace down here, right. So the lacha is you have a corpse underneath it. The tuma, if it's a tefach above, the tuma hits. And it spreads underneath the roof, but it doesn't go above. So this is mivian. It spreads the tumah to everything underneath it, but it's chutzeitz. It's a block. It's an obstacle for the tumah to proceed above. Okay. Now normally those things go together. If something is mevius a tumah, it's also chutzeitz. If you didn't have a roof, it wouldn't be mevi. It wouldn't go across, but it would be eino chutzeitz. It would go through. Some types of things, from a rabbinic perspective or whatever, sometimes it could be biblical. For us to say rabbinic has the worst of both worlds. It both spreads the tumah underneath it, and it allows tumah to go above it. And one example would be these types of vegetables for maror. If you use them as your roof, they were above your tumah, your dead body, it would be mevi, it would bring it because it's a physical object, it's wide enough, but the tumah would also continue above. Why? And what we're going to see is because these are types of things, like we discussed before, certain things, leaves or whatever, which will wither and crumble. These are types of things that when they would dry out will crumble, and therefore after a while there won't be a roof over the top, and the rabbis were afraid you won't be paying attention. So therefore they had to say, it's like it's already crumbled, and you have the worst of both worlds. Since it now is present, it brings the tumah. Since eventually it'll be crumbled, we look at those that's already happened, and the tumah goes through it. Okay, so that's for laws of tumah, but now we're going to see how that's relevant for sukkah. Uposlin b'sukkah, and also it's invalid to use a sukkah. Mishum avir, like air. My time. Now, what would you say before that word of air? Could you use this for schach? Could you use maror for schach?
It's food. It's
food, right? So it's makabel tumah. So you can't use it. But if it's just bad schach as bad schach, what's the halach of bad schach? So we're going to find out that bad schach invalidates only if it's 4 tfachim. Less than 4 tfachim is not a problem. Also, another big leniency of bad schach is you'll remember the principle of the bending wall, right? So the principle of the bending wall is, here's your sukkah, right? If you have bad schach here, up to 4 amot, right? You can envision this as a bent wall. So bad schach is not the end of your sukkah. If it's juxtaposed, contiguous to the wall, it actually can be up to 4 amot, and your sukkah could still be good. Even if the bad schach were in the middle, it would only be a problem of 4 tfachim. So that's by bad schach. However, if it's air, if you have no schach, then once it is 3 tfachim of air, once this is 3 tfachim of air, okay, it's no good. Why? Because
can't
once
say
it's
lavud
ritachim, you can't say lavud, and then your schach isn't attached to your walls. So air is a bigger problem than bad schach. Okay, and if it's in the middle as well, once it's 3 tfachim, it's no good. Why? Because again, then the ceiling is not connected. It's like two separate ceilings, right?
Why can't you have a bent wall for the future?
Because walls are only physical. So even when we use the magic of the bent wall, it needs to be physical schach to view it as a continuation of the wall. But if it's a break of air, then it stops. There's no wall. There's no roof, right? So then you have no wall. The schach isn't connected to the wall. Invalid. Or if you have 3 tfachim of air in the middle, then you have schachs that are not connected. 2 halves of the sukkah aren't connected to one another, right? That's assuming it's going the entire length of the sukkah. Let's say this was an aerial view, right? You were looking from above, and that was your sukkah. That was your 3 tfachim of air, right? So you don't have a kosher sukkah, right? This has, maybe you have a kosher, but only half of your sukkah is kosher. Depending on if you have, let's say, 3 walls here or something like that. But you see, that splits your sukkah down in half.
You can't have a split. I thought the rule for schach was just you had to have more shade than sun. Why?
Well, but you have to have a continuous roof. If you have, we'll discuss more of that later. But yes, if there's a whole split 3 tfachim down, then the schach is not connected to itself. Okay. So anyway, so it's worse for something to be air than for it to be what do you call it? For it to be pasal schach. Actually, if you've got a big thing of air in your sukkah, you're better off putting pasal schach to fill it up than to leave it as air.
Okay, so
if you have a big thing of air in your sukkah, you're better off filling it with pasal schach than leaving it as air. So the chiddush here is you've got this horseradish as your schach. Technically, Abai should say you're going to leave your sukkah because it'll be smelly. That's what Abai should think. But anyway, technically it's pasal schach, and okay, if it's less than 4 tfachim, you're fine. Or even less than 4 amos if it's against the edge of the wall. But comes along the Gemara and says, no, actually, once it's 3 tfachim, it's invalid. It's like it's air. It's as bad as air. Why is it as bad as air? So it's like what they say on the radio, right? The worst thing is to have dead air, right? Just fill it up with anything. It's better than to have dead air. So the Gemara says like this, okay? So uposim b'sukkah mishum avir. It's invalid like a sukkah like air, not just like pasal schach. My time. And why is this true? Both questions. Why does it not be a barrier for tumah, and why is it as bad as air for the sukkah? Since when it dries out, it crumbles and falls down. You look at it even now as though that happened because we're afraid you won't be paying attention, and therefore we treat it now as the worst case scenario in the end, and therefore it's like it's air, so it doesn't stop tumah.
There will be a physical gap.
If once it dries out, yes, it will crumble and fall down.
That, like it just be,
I don't know.
The leaves would go. We'd still have some.
I don't know, and I don't know why the Gemara is saying all the vegetables of Mara. What, they're all the same, and they're different that way than other foods? Other foods don't crumble, so I don't know. But
it's interesting because it's the same reason. Really, in the real world, the vegetables don't do that thing with tumah where they have tumah underneath and tumah above.
Right.
The rabbis would have made it because they might crumble.
Exactly.
It's the same thing here. Really.
Exactly. It's the same explanation for tumah as it is by the schach, why it's treated as air. So command the less nudami. Even now we view it as though they're no longer there. Fine. Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna habotzer lagas ein lo yadot. So now we really start getting into the world of tumatara. If you are harvesting grapes, that's what the word botzer means, for the gas, for the pressing vat, you're going to make it into wine. Ein lo yadot. The principle of a yad, hand, does not apply. There's a basic principle of tumah that something that is attached to a vessel. Let's say a vessel. You have a handle on a jug, and you touch the tumah to the handle, the jug becomes tamei. It's like an extension of the vessel. The same way that's true by a vessel, it's also true by food. If you have an apple, and you've got the little, like a twig that comes out of the apple, what's that called, a twig? Stem, thank you. You have the stem. So since that's used as a hand, because sometimes you'll pick up the apple by the stem, right? So then, or let's say by your grape. You've got the whole stalk or whatever it is, and you pick it up by that stalk. So that serves as a handle to the grape. So even though the stalk by itself doesn't become tamei, if it's attached to the grape and you touch tumah to the stalk, the grape becomes tamei, or the apple becomes tamei. That's called a yad, a handle.
Why does the stalk again not become tamei?
Because it's not food. It's just a piece of wood, right? If it were by itself, right? But if it's serving as a handle to the food, it transfers tumah to the food. So now, let's say you're harvesting grapes to make wine. So in that case, you don't want those stems. right? If you're eating grapes, you maybe want those stems as a way of, holding on to the grape. But if you're harvesting it for wine, you don't want those stems. They're just getting in the way. So even though physically they're attached, they're not considered a yad, a handle. They have, because they don't have a desired function as a handle. Okay, so that's what he says. If you're harvesting grapes for the vat and for making wine, then the idea of yad doesn't apply. And those stems do not communicate tuma, do not transfer tuma. So that's what he says. For Rav Menashe Bar Gada Amar Rav Huna, hakotzer l'schach ein lo yadot. Let's say you are harvesting grapes and you want to use the grapes and the vine for schach. Then the idea of yad does not apply. Now it's a little bit funny because you don't actually want the grape for the schach, you just want the vine for the schach. But it's the same type of an idea. If you're harvesting it for grapevines, let's say for schach, you're not interested in the grape. So you don't want the grape attached to the stalk. You just want the stalk. Okay? So it's conceptually, it boils down to the same thing. You don't want these two attached. Okay, so therefore there as well. Now that's relevant. Why is it relevant? Because if you are putting your grapevine with the grapes up on your schach, you have to know how much of this is kosher schach, how much of it is pasul. Well, how about the part attached to the grape? Does that get counted as part of the grape for weighing the amount of pasul schach, or does it be counted as part of the rest of the vine? Okay,
so
and he says,
so you're allowed to actually.
yeah, well, there can be a certain amount of pasul schach as long as it's mixed up and it's in the minority.
Grapes on it, and we're not worried that you're going to start plucking the grapes on Yom Tov?
All right, that's a different issue about Succah mitzvaso, where we say where we're not worried. You can put up stuff also for like decorations. So let's take a look. The Gemara says like this. Okay. If you say the case of, by the way, right, kotzer might not also be referring to things other than grapes. You could be cutting down, I don't know, big fronds of palm trees and has some bananas attached to it, okay? So the one that says that the case by schach, it's not a yad, koshkein botzer, he would certainly say by the case of harvesting grapes that the twigs are not a yad, dilo nichale, because you obviously don't want it connected to the grape. Because it's going to absorb, if you have stalks in your vat, it's going to, suck up the wine. It'll absorb the wine, and you don't want that. It'll impurify the wine. So there's no question that you don't want the stalks when you're making wine, and that it's not considered a yad. But mandam or botzer. But if you just gave your example by the harvesting grapes that it's not a yad, shein lo yadot, you might not agree to the case of schach. Avo kotzer yesh lo yadot. By cutting off like palms of branches of a tree, you might have a principle of yad. Why? You don't want it connected to the food. So why are they considered to be like a unit? So no, because you do want it connected to the pieces of fruit that's on the branch. Why? So it shouldn't scatter. Meaning, if you have you might want the nice heavy piece of fruit attached because it'll weigh down the branch and it'll keep the branch in place. So even though it's pasul schach, you might want it to be attached to the branch because the heavy fruit will keep the branch in place. And since you want it attached, the idea of yad would still apply because there's a desire to attach the fruit with the stalk that is connected to it. Okay, so there you could actually say that it is considered part of the fruit because you want the fruit connected to the branch, and therefore it counts as pasul schach. So now the Gemara just tries to prove this. Name it Rav Menashe Bar Gada Tanai. Let's say this issue is a debate of Tanaim. Tanya Mutana Brisa. Soche te'enim ubehem te'enim. Branches of figs, fig branches, and with figs attached to them. Parchilin uben anavim, or clusters of grapes. I'm sorry. Like grapevines, whatever, clusters with the grapes still on them. Kashin ubehen shivalim, or straw with the ears still attached to it. Muchabadot ben tamarim, or big fronds of palm trees with the dates still attached to it. Kulan, and you use these for schach. So the wood part, the branch part, and the leaves are kosher. The fruit part is pasul. So here's the halacha: im soles meruba al ochlim, if the waste product, meaning the leaves and the branches, is more than the fruit than the food part. So sheira, it's kosher. Because again, remember this idea that if you have a mixture of schach, kosher and pasul schach, you can go by the majority. V'imlav psula, and if not, it's invalid. Okay, you go by, you figure out what the majority is. By the way, you have to love the irony that the name for kosher schach is psolet, which is like pasul, and that's from the similar drasha of psolet goren v'yekev, the remnant of what comes from the threshing floor. Acherim omrim, others say Actually, kashim merubim al yadot v'al. No, it's not enough to have more of this other stuff than the food, than the fruit. It has to be more than the fruit and the twigs that are attached to the fruit. That gets counted in the pasol schach. So you see, this seems to be what's being debated. Do you count the twigs in the pasol schach as part of the fruit or not? My love, this is the debate. This seems to be the debate. The Marsavar Yesh Lehen Yadot, that there are hands, that the twigs are part of the fruit when cut for schach, Umarsavar Ein Lhem Yadot, that it's not. That seems to be exactly the issue. It says, Rabbi Ava Varei Tanai. For Rabbi Ava, who says even when you cut it for schach, they're not considered, they're considered to be hands. That's certainly a debate of Tanayim, because here you see that some say they're not hands. Rabbi Menashe Bar Gada milema Tanayim, but for Rabbi Menashe Bar Gada, is it a debate of Tanayim? No. I'll say no. When you're doing it for the schach, for the purpose of schach, everybody agrees you don't want the fruit connected, and they're considered separate, and there's no concept of hands. So why is there a concept of hands in this case? The case here where there's a debate whether the twigs are considered part of the fruit or not is not when you cut it for schach. If you cut it for schach, you don't want it attached, and it's not considered part of the fruit. The debate here where Rabbi Meir says it is part of the fruit and it's invalid was when initially it was cut for the purpose of fruit. And if it's initially it was cut for the purpose of fruit, okay, then it is considered part of the fruit. So we'll pick up with this tomorrow because I was a little bit rushed, but the basic idea is that there is an opinion that says it's part of the fruit, but the claim is that would not be the normal case. Normally if it's for schach, it's separate. It's only part of the fruit when you were cutting it for the sake of fruit. Then you do have the concept of yad. All right, just to be continued tomorrow.
So I just want to get back to that. So,